The dense jungle moon of Creon 7 loomed below the transport vessel, its green and purple canopies shimmering under twin suns. Inside the ship's lower observation deck, students from 23 species gathered in silent anticipation, their eyes fixed on the terrain they were about to enter. The atmosphere buzzed with tension, excitement, and for some nervous energy. The Intergalactic Academy's most infamous exam was about to begin, the Level 4 Stealth and Camouflage Assessment. At the front of the chamber, Professor Zirak adjusted his shimmering carapace and cleared his throat with a mechanical rasp. His tall, insectoid frame towered over most students, and the room fell instantly silent as his antenna twitched in a subtle but commanding rhythm. He pressed a long clawed finger against a holographic console, projecting the terrain's 3D model into the air. "You will be dropped in Zone 47, he began, his voice crackling like static. "The terrain is active jungle, unregulated with local hazards left in place to enhance realism. Over the next 10 hours, you are to evade detection by 60 patrol drones equipped with infrared motion and sound-based surveillance systems. Your goal is to remain undetected for as long as possible. You may use any available equipment issued by your homeworld's defense me's, except weapons as murmurs and clicking tones filled the air." Wyatt adjusted the strap of his compact gear pack and took a quiet breath. He was the only human in this cohort, a fact that made him a constant subject of subtle side glances and the occasional condescending remark. Yet he had learned to ignore the glances, the whispers. He had grown up on Earth's backwoods in the Appalachian Ranges, raised by his grandfather after his parents were lost in the Red Nebula incident. His grandfather had been a survivalist, a man who believed that nature would always beat machines if you knew how to listen. Wyatt had learned that lesson deeply, and he never forgot it. Professor Zirak's compound eyes scanned the group. "Your personal biometric markers will be monitored. If your vitals flatline or show critical stress, you will be extracted and receive automatic disqualification. Stealth is not silence, it is mastery of presence." He paused and turned toward the human. "Cadet Wyatt, given your planet's classification as a death world, we expect a competent showing." Wyatt nodded once without speaking. He was used to that label, Death Worlder. Most species treated humans with a mix of curiosity and quiet fear. Earth was considered a dangerous, chaotic world by galactic standards, filled with unpredictable weather, aggressive wildlife, and a disturbing resistance to environmental threats. For Wyatt, it was simply home. "Prepare for drop," Zarek commanded. Moments later, the vessel's floor opened into segmented launch tubes. Students lined up, each entering individual pods that would launch them into various sections of the jungle zone. The student next to Wyatt, a crystalline being from the orbiting rings of Threx 8, hummed softly and sneered through her translucent cheek plates. "Let's see how long the wild ape lasts," she whispered in her own tongue. Wyatt caught the tone, if not the words. He smiled faintly. When his pod closed around him, darkness filled the interior. Only a soft pulsing light illuminated the countdown. His heart rate was steady. He had already decided that he would not use the optical cloaker or the thermomasking gel the Academy had issued. Instead, he had brought one small emergency pouch of Earth-based supplies, duct tape, cord, an all-weather poncho, and a folding entrenching tool. Everything else he would find or improvise on site. The pod launched with a dull thud and rocketed toward the jungle below. His body pressed into the seat as the thrusters flared. Then just as quickly it slowed, descending gently under auto-guided parachutes. When the hatch opened, Wyatt stepped into a world of layered green pungent rot and insect buzz so loud it filled the air like static. The heat struck him first. Thick and wet, it clung to his skin. The air was dense, the light diffused by towering plants with leaf blades wider than his shoulders. Birds, or something bird-like, screeched in the distance. The jungle was alive, moving, shifting with micro-motions impossible to chart unless you were part of it. He crouched immediately, opened his gear pouch, and buried the tracking beacon issued by the Academy under a pile of hot leaves. The beacon would still send vitals data, but its external light, barely noticeable, was too risky. Then he pulled a collapsible shovel from the side of his bag and started scraping a shallow depression beneath a fern-covered hillock. While the other students likely scattered, already activating their cloaks or building elaborate mirrored shelters, Wyatt moved slowly. Every step was measured, every sound catalogued in his mind. The jungle didn't want to be rushed, and if he was going to disappear, he had to become part of it. Sweat poured down his back as he gathered mud from a nearby creek bed. It was rich, dark, and thick with organic compounds that steamed slightly in the heat. He smeared it over every exposed part of his body, starting with his face, then arms, legs, and neck. The coolness was immediate, but that wasn't the point. The mud blocked his heat signature and dulled the scent trails that drones might track. He pressed wet moss into the mud on his back and shoulders, adding bits of leaves and jungle debris, until he looked less like a man and more like a growth on the forest floor. He checked the small, carved-out depression under the hillock, deep enough to lie in, barely enough space to stretch out. He slid in carefully, covering his body with more loose leaves and brambles, forming a natural blend of broken patterns. Camouflage wasn't just about color, it was about shadow, contrast, light disruption. He learned that from his grandfather while hunting deer in the early misty dawns back home. Eyeing still, he slowed his breath. Inhale 5 seconds, hold 2, exhale 6. Heartbeat calmed, muscles relaxed. The jungle embraced him. Within 10 minutes, he had become invisible in the most primal way possible. Not by erasing his presence, but by becoming something unnoticeable within the world around him, unseen, unheard, unremarkable. Somewhere above, the first drone flew by. Its repulsors hummed faintly, and Wyatt could hear its sensor blips. He knew it wouldn't spot him. Not yet. He closed his eyes and smiled faintly. The test had begun. But while others trusted machines, cloaks, and shimmering tech, he trusted the Earthborn way. And Criven 7 had more in common with Earth than most of the students would realize, until it was too late. The first detection alert came just 43 minutes into the exam. A sharp beep echoed through the control center, located in orbit, where Professor Zirak stood watching multiple holoscreens at once, each tracking a student through layers of sensor data and thermal visuals. His mandibles twitched in disappointment. The Threxian cadet, a crystalline being named Rawl, had just triggered a full thermal scan alert. Her optical camouflage flickered as a patrol drone zeroed in on her position, descending swiftly through the canopy. On the screen, Rawl twisted in panic. Her body shimmered with a cascade of refracted light as she attempted to adjust her crystal field, but the reaction was too slow. The drone pinged her with a blue tracking pulse, locking her score at a measly 6%. She hissed in frustration and vanished from view as an extraction beam pulled her out of the jungle floor. Zirak tapped one of his limbs against the data console and murmured something in his native tongue. He had expected better from the Threxian elite. Across the monitoring room, rows of supervisors recorded the results. Screens lit up with red alerts one after another, and the professor's irritation grew with each failure. A male volar from the bloodgrass plains of Mach 3 had been detected while constructing an artificial burrow. His thermal blanket malfunctioned after 2 minutes underground. A Syrian with a bioadaptive cloak had accidentally triggered his location beacon due to elevated heart rate. One student even tried to climb a tree and was stung unconscious by native wasp beasts in less than 10 minutes. The failure rate was unprecedented. Out of the 23 cadets deployed into Zone 47, 9 had already been eliminated. Another 5 had triggered yellow warnings, their camouflage compromised, but not yet, resulting in full detection. The jungle, it seemed, had no patience for technology that ignored its rhythms. Zarek paced slowly along the edge of the viewing platform. His compound eyes stopped on one data stream, Unit 19H, human designation Wyatt. The status read, no visual contact, no sensor flags, vital signs normal. In short, undetected. The professor paused. Every other student had moved at least once, even those who were still holding on. Wyatt, however, had no recorded movement. The pod had landed. The biometric signal confirmed deployment and then silence. Not a single step registered. No change in position, no heat flares, no motion. The professor tilted his head slightly and brought up the drone footage from the human zone. The video played back the last 30 minutes. A drone had hovered directly over the area 3 times, scanning with wide-spectrum sensors. No visual anomalies, no structural disturbances, just a pile of ferns, mud, and natural decay. Zirak slowed the footage and zoomed in. Nothing. Just when he was about to dismiss it, the leaf pile shifted barely. A twitch, like the settling of disturbed moss after a breeze. Zirak replayed it 5 times, adjusting filters, switching to infrared. Still no heat signature. The student had not only evaded detection, he had erased himself. On the forest floor, Wyatt remained motionless. He had allowed himself a single blink every 60 seconds. Every muscle in his body was aligned to the earth. He had spent hours in trians on Earth, waiting for prey that could hear the snap of a twig from 100 yards. Compared to those animals, the drones were predictable and lazy. They hummed inconsistent frequencies, moved in grid patterns, and responded to visual or thermal triggers. He had figured out their scanning angles just from sound. He had heard one pass over him twice already, its pulsing energy sending a mild tremor into the soil. The third time, it had hovered for a full 30 seconds. He didn't flinch. Elsewhere in the zone, panic was beginning to set in. On a rocky outcrop near a thermal vent, a tall female cadet from the aquatic planet Vel tried to mimic the local fungus formations by erecting a dome-shaped optical field. She had calculated the movement of the wind, even incorporated scent nemelizing foam. But her species relied on water-rich environments, and within 20 minutes, the heat began to dry out her skin. She squirmed, lost focus, and the drone picked up the jerky movement instantly. Another red alert. Another failure. At the base of a massive bluebark tree, 2 cadets from a warrior caste species called the Dravik attempted to merge their cloaks, hoping combined energy would create a stronger field. Instead, their systems clashed, releasing a pulse that disoriented both and lit up the nearby canopy like a beacon. The drone didn't even need to search. It just dropped straight down, pinged them, and activated extraction protocols. The control sense air had grown thick with tension. Supervisors whispered behind flat data panels, occasionally glancing at the professor. Zurek's mandibles had stopped moving entirely, a sign that he was calculating something more than results. He studied the human's biometric data again. Heart rate steady, respiration minimal, core temperature slightly below average, no stress indicators, no panic spikes. The reading was almost meditative. He switched over to the surrounding microclimate data. The temperature in Wyatt's zone had shifted slightly, cooler by a fraction. It was possible that the human had altered the immediate environment. Zirek had only seen such results from elite infiltration specialists, but this was a cadet, not a trained field operative. At the 70-minute mark, another alert sounded. A male student from the moon colony of Ever had attempted to mimic local fauna by suspending himself upside down in a cocoon of adhesive gel. His cloak flickered mid-air when a burst of static interfered with his emitter. A drone located the anomaly in under a minute. His score froze at 11%. A disappointing result for a species that marketed its stealth technologies to half the galactic sectors. Zarek issued a quiet sigh through his spiracles. Out of the original 23, only 6 remained undetected, and even those were under review. One had displayed a thermal fluctuation the drones were analyzing. Another had moved slightly too quickly across a stream. Only one file remained clean, untouched, human. For the first time in a decade, the professor leaned back from the monitors and narrowed his eyes. There was no precedent in recent academy history for a human cadet outperforming galactic peers in a test so heavily biased toward technological integration. He considered the implications carefully. In the jungle, Wyatt remained calm. He hadn't heard a drone in the last 12 minutes, which meant the grid had moved westward. His plan was working. He had estimated that most students would attempt to build or deploy tech-based camouflage in the first 30 minutes. That noise would draw the drones like vultures. His job was to wait absolutely still until the drones completed at least one full sweep. Then he could shift, but not yet. A beetle the size of his fist crawled over his ankle. He didn't move. A rootworm slithered along the side of his ribs. He let it pass. The jungle was testing him now as much as the drones. The mud on his skin had dried and crusted over, forming a second shell that now matched the color of the leaf litter around him. He didn't itch. He didn't twitch. He was becoming something else. Not a man, not even a cadet, just part of Creon 7. And Creon 7 didn't give itself away. A faint tremor passed through the soil as another drone glided overhead, its repulsor field disturbing the undergrowth in barely perceptible pulses. Wyatt listened to the subtle shift of pebbles, the rustling of a distant frond, as the air pressure changed. The descending pitch of the drone's sensor scan as it passed just beyond his position. He remained still. The mud that clung to his body had hardened further, forming a dull gray-brown crust that merged him into the forest's own camouflage. Each inch of his form had been deliberately smeared with organic material for one purpose: to vanish in plain sight. The cooling sensation on his skin had faded hours ago. Now the jungle heat pressed down on him like a wet cloth. Insects crawled freely across his body. One paused on his cheekbone before darting across his temple. He let it. Every urge to twitch, scratch, or react had long been buried beneath the discipline instilled in him over years of silent hunts and survival drills. He had always known that the moment he moved unnecessarily would be the moment he lost. So he waited. His ears picked up a new frequency, softer than the drone's mechanical hum. Footsteps, not animal, not insect. It was the subtle crush of leaves beneath deliberately careful motion. The cadence was too precise to be wild. Someone was nearby. Another cadet. He shifted his eyes slightly within their sockets, scanning the edge of his peripheral vision without moving his head. 30 paces away, a shape moved between 2 thick barked trees, tall, wide-shouldered, and covered in flickering shimmer. A male Dravik, the same one who had earlier tried combining energy fields with another cadet. Clearly, he had evaded full detection and was still active. The shimmer cloak was operational again, but it struggled to adapt to the broken lighting of the canopy. Light pierced through the trees in unpredictable shafts, casting constantly shifting patterns onto the ground. The Dravik's cloak flickered in those places like a faulty projection. Wyatt could tell the other cadet was nervous. He moved in fits and starts, crouching low and scanning the sky every few seconds. The shimmer suit was clearly malfunctioning, overcompensating with frequent recalibrations that distorted the field around his body. Wyatt knew it was only a matter of time before a drone honed in on that irregularity. He counted seconds in his head. 3 minutes later, the faint, descending whine of a patrol drone signaled the approach. The Dravik froze, pressed his back against the trunk of the nearest tree, and activated a pulse disperser from his wristband. It emitted a low-energy sonic bubble intended to scramble sensor readings. Theoretically, it was supposed to mask thermal emissions. In practice, the bubble disrupted local wildlife, alerting predator birds in the canopy that something unnatural had entered their territory. A screech echoed above. One bird dove toward the Drake, wings flared, beak open in rage. The cadet flinched and stumbled back into a bed of dry leaves. The shimmer field snapped like glass, revealing him in full. The drone descended like a hawk, tagged him with a green laser pulse, and issued the elimination chime. The cadet cursed aloud, his voice laced with frustration and disbelief. Seconds later, the transport beam whisked him upward in a streak of blue light. Silence returned. Wyatt had not moved. He knew the drone would complete a full sweep of the area before departing. This particular class of drones operated on a spiral sweep algorithm, searching the hot zone in widening circular passes before moving on. He counted the intervals between each pulse, mapping them against the background noise of the jungle. After 7 rotations, the drone increased altitude and vanished beyond the treetops. Only then did he allow his body a slight repositioning. His legs had begun to cramp under the weight of the dried mud and stillness. Slowly, he shifted one foot, pressing it deeper into the dugout depression. A fresh layer of ferns concealed the movement. His breathing remained slow, controlled. He pulled from memory the contour map of the zone that had been briefly shown before the test. It was a mental image now, sharpened by instinct. A narrow creek curved just 20 meters to the north, fed by underground springs that maintained a consistent cool temperature. If he reached it by nightfall, he could reapply fresh mud for thermal masking, but movement had to be minimal. One wrong step could undo everything. He scanned the nearby terrain with just his eyes. The insects had returned. A long-bodied crawler was nibbling on a patch of lichen near his elbow. He watched it work, marveling at the patience of the jungle. Everything here was quiet. Nothing rushed. Survival depended on blending, not dominating. He had always felt more at home in environments like this. The Academy's polished corridors and endless streams of digital interface training never appealed to him. He had passed those exams. Of course, he wasn't foolish enough to ignore the necessity of adaptation. But he never felt connected to them the way he did to places like this, where the measure of one's skill was etched into the ground and tested by silence. In the distance, a sudden flare lit the sky. Red-orange, followed by a low boom. Someone had activated an emergency beacon. That meant a cadet was injured, likely from an encounter with native fauna. Wyatt didn't flinch. Another would be eliminated. The scoreboard would be shifting rapidly by now. He wondered how many remained. Surely less than 5, maybe only 3. He was confident he had lasted longer than the Threxian, the Surian, and the Dravik. He would bet on that. But the aquatic cadet, he hadn't heard her fail yet, nor the insectoid mimic from Belva. Those two had shown discipline in earlier exercises. Still, Wyatt wasn't concerned about them. His focus was the terrain, the drones, and the passage of time. He had trained himself to feel time as a rhythm, not a clock. The jungle taught him when to wait and when to act. This was still the time for waiting. Above, the twin suns had begun to shift in the sky, their alignment entering the late afternoon phase. The light grew warmer. Longer shadows stretched across the jungle floor. This was the window he had anticipated, the gold hour of sensor interference. As the light scattered, it created a series of low-contrast blind spots. Thermal readings became less reliable. Shadows grew thick, confusing motion tracking. For the drones, it was the least optimal scanning period. For Wyatt, it was his chance. Slowly, he gathered the ferns atop his back and placed them aside. Inch by inch, he slid out from the depression he had spent nearly 5 hours inside. His body protested the movement, muscles numb from the pressure and stillness. He gritted his teeth and pressed through the strain. He crawled, not upright, not on all fours, but low and flat, letting his chest drag along the leaves and loose soil. He moved like a reptile, using forearms and elbows, pausing every 30 seconds to let the jungle adjust to his presence. He didn't leave a trail. Each disturbed leaf was placed back into position behind him. Every motion was calculated. He reached a fallen log, paused beside it, and pressed his ear to the ground. No drone hum, no approaching movement. The way forward was clear. He slipped over the log and continued toward the creek. The air changed as he neared water, cooler, slightly fresher. The sounds of insects changed pitch. He knew he was close. Within minutes, he spotted the glint of moving water through a thick curtain of vines. The creek was shallow, but flowing steadily. He dipped a finger into it, confirming the temperature, perfect for masking. He submerged both hands, scrubbing off the old, crusted mud from his arms, then reapplied a new layer with the same deliberate thoroughness. The scent of the earth mixed with the scent of his own sweat. It grounded him. As he crouched beside the creek, listening to the rhythms of life around him, he realized something. This wasn't just a test. Not for him. This was a reminder that while the galaxy chased perfection through technology, there was still strength and simplicity, in stillness, in listening. He wasn't just surviving the exam. He was redefining how it could be won. Professor Zirak stood motionless in the center of the command platform, his limbs split in quiet frustration as the 8th drone returned with another red-coated extraction confirmation. A flickering holographic outline of the Belliver mimic dissolved into data fragments on the screen beside him. Her vitals had spiked moments before capture, and the playback revealed she had triggered her own panic by misjudging the pheromonal signals of a predator species nesting beneath the tree she had chosen as her hide. She had lasted nearly 5 hours, respectable, but ultimately not enough. The professor's staff of analysts worked silently around him. Every beat from the control panels, every shifting telemetry line, drew weary eyes and tight lips. The test had devolved into a pattern no one expected. The advanced gear, the elite species trained for stealth since birth. None had endured as anticipated. The scoreboard displayed the final 3 cadets, still undetected. One was the aquatic Voon female, whose signature had briefly vanished earlier, but was now registering again in a region near the western ridge. The second was a male Orcs scholar, using sound-reflective webbing to simulate local fauna. The third was the human unit 19 hatch, still unmoved, still undetected. The professor brought up the feed from the humans assigned quadrant. The drones in that zone had reported no abnormalities. When he activated the visual playback, there was nothing, only layered green, dappled shadow and swaying undergrowth in the soft twilight. For all intents and purposes, Wyatt did not exist on the battlefield, not as a cadet, not even as a biological anomaly. He had ceased to emit any signs of independent identity, What remained was a patch of jungle no different than any other. Zarek's thoughts churned behind his angular eyes. He had taught for 400 cycles, witnessed cadets simulate perfection using the most advanced tools of their civilizations. But what Wyatt was doing now had no correlation to simulation. This was not mastery of holograms or interference pulses. This was something else, something older. The professor did not like surprises, and this was becoming the most unpredictable outcome he had seen in decades. He turned to one of the drone commanders and issued a single directive. Confirm status of Unit 19H with direct flyover. No engagement. Observation only. The commander nodded without question. Drone Z-12 detached from its orbiting pattern and began a low descent toward the creek quadrant. Its sensors activated immediately. Infrared acoustic resonance and magnetic distortion mapping. The jungle welcomed it with stillness. Below, Wyatt had repositioned himself slightly, now nestled in the shadow of an angled root system. His new mud layer had dried into a slightly darker hue, blending perfectly with the moist soil surrounding the creek. He had formed a new indentation beneath an overgrown fern curtain, ensuring minimal airflow disturbance. A few meters away, small amphibians croaked steadily, undisturbed by his presence. That was his true confirmation. When the wild resumed its rhythm, he had integrated successfully. He heard the shift in wind pressure first, a faint oscillation, then the quiet purr of the repulsor unit as the drone crept closer. His breathing slowed further. He visualized each part of his body as inert, each joint and muscle no longer organic, but part of the terrain. The sound passed overhead, lingering. He heard a faint pulse emitted into the ground-penetrating sonar, a more aggressive scan. Still, he did not react. The drone hovered above his position for 47 seconds. Then it rose. In the control room, Zarak watched the scan feed live. The overlays of heat, vibration, and chemical trace all returned null results. The human's pulse and oxygen levels remained so stable, the AI flagged the data as potentially artificial. The professor dismissed the alert manually and zoomed the video feed to maximum resolution. A single leaf flickered near the base of a root. Wind, maybe. Nothing else moved. He leaned back and issued a sharp directive. See scans of Unit 19H. Rotate the grid to Velon sector. The professor did not explain his reasoning. He did not need to. His gaze lingered on the human's blank coordinate marker for several more seconds before switching feeds. Across the jungle, the villain female cadet was in trouble. Her location was known now, her movements increasingly erratic. Her shimmering skin had begun to dull under the dry air. Without a nearby moisture source, her physiology was suffering. Her skin flaked at the edges of her collar, a sign of dehydration. She had attempted to dig into the earth to reach the aquifer beneath, but lacked the tools. Her bioluminescence, a trait typically controllable, was now triggering in bursts of stress. That alone had drawn 2 drones within proximity. She bolted. It was a mistake. As soon as she shifted from crawling to running, a thermal spike was logged. Drone P7 identified her instantly. The lock tone blared across the command room as her marker turned red. Her scream echoed faintly before the extraction beam pulled her from the clearing. 2 remained. The auric male currently suspended in a self-spun cocoon high within a tree fork, and the human buried beneath mud vines and patience. The Aurora cocoon had held for hours, drawing praise from the sensor analysts. His bio-silk shielded both heat and scent, and his natural stillness was rivaled only by the most efficient stasis pods. Yet in the command room, one analyst raised a hand. "Sir," the analyst said, "pollen shift in auric quadrant is triggering algorithmic review." Zarek turned instantly. "Show me a panel lit up with real-time environmental mapping." A rare flowering plant had bloomed just below the auric cocoon, its pollen known for rapid expansion. The data revealed an abnormal drift. When cross-referenced with the cadet's breathing cycle, the airborne particles were being inhaled and exhaled at uneven intervals. He was visible, just not yet discovered. Zarak nodded once. "Dispatch, drone C4, confirm anomaly." Minutes passed. Then the alarm. The cocoon vibrated. The webbing shimmered. Detected. The drone engaged, tagged, and the auric male vanished into a streak of green light. The scoreboard changed. One cadet remained. Unit 19. The command room went still. Zurzak observed the reactions of his subordinates. The silent exchange of glances, the subtle disbelief. He felt it too. But unlike them, he also felt something deeper, a disturbance. The Academy had structured its curriculum around the supremacy of progress tools, simulations, enhancements. But here was a species from a backwater death world, outperforming the most advanced civilizations without a single external aid. It challenged the narrative. The professor stared at the human's static position. 10 hours were nearly complete. He would not interfere further. Below, Wyatt opened his eyes slightly. The drone sounds were gone. The jungle was returning to full voice. Distant night predators stirred. The air grew heavier as twilight deepened. He could feel the change, the test nearing its end. He didn't move. Not yet. Not until the final confirmation. A low-frequency pulse spread across the jungle. A neutral tone. Not aggressive, not inquisitive. A signal. Test complete. He slowly raised his head. The mud cracked slightly as it bent with his movement. He rose to a crouch, eyes adjusting to the amber light filtering through the trees. The silence was surreal. For a moment, he thought he was alone on a planet untouched by war, study, or competition. Then, a voice came through his earset, calm, cold. "Unit 19. H, you have successfully completed the stealth trial with 0 detection events. Remain at location. Extraction begins now." He stood fully as the beam of soft blue light descended upon him. The jungle watched him disappear, quiet, unblinking. The beam dissolved the jungle around him in a wash of cold light. Wyatt felt his feet lift gently from the forest floor as the extraction sequence initiated. Molecules guided upward in a perfect column of energy. For a brief moment, the wet scent of Creon 7 soil, the chorus of nocturnal creatures, and the pressure of silence faded into nothingness. His boots touched down softly on the metal surface of the decontamination chamber inside the orbital facility. Sterile white light replaced the jungle's warm shadows. A soft mist sprayed across his body, washing away the dried mud and forest debris, leaving his skin clean but strangely cold. The silence felt foreign now, synthetic, as if the real world had paused and left him behind. As the door to the chamber opened with a hiss, he stepped into a narrow corridor lined with reinforced glass panels. On the other side stood several observers, analysts, and robotic med units, scanning him silently. A voice crackled through the overhead speakers, firm, professional, devoid of praise or critique. "Unit 19H, proceed to the debrief chamber." He obeyed without comment, his steps slow, his legs still stiff from hours of stillness. Every motion felt exaggerated in this sterile environment. The door slid open, revealing a circular chamber with a single seat in the center. Opposite it stood Professor Zirak. The insectoid professor stood perfectly still, his iridescent exoskeleton reflecting the room's artificial light, his multiple eyes fixed on Wyatt with the intensity of a predator examining an unfamiliar species. No greetings were exchanged. Wyatt lowered himself into the seat without being asked. He met the professor's stare, unblinking. Zarek approached slowly. No weapons, no synthetic masking, no neural interface, no algorithmic assistance. His voice echoed through the chamber. And yet you were not seen. Not once. Wyatt nodded. Correct. Zirak circled him once. Do you understand what this means? I completed the assignment. You exceeded it, the professor said, his voice tighter now. You revealed a flaw in our doctrine, a contradiction in everything we teach here. I didn't intend to. But you did, Zirak snapped, his mandibles clicking. The others failed with technology while you succeeded with stillness and dirt. Do you understand what that says about our methods? I understand what it says about yours, Wyatt replied calmly. You rely on systems. I rely on awareness. The professor stopped pacing. That is not how students speak to instructors at this academy. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm trying to be honest. Zirak studied him for a long moment. Then he turned away and activated the hollow panel. The main screen displayed the updated rankings. Wyatt's name stood alone at the top, highlighted in gold. Below it, the names of the other cadets glowed in various shades of gray, symbols next to them indicating failure through detection, injury, or system malfunction. The other students are watching the broadcast now. Zyrtak said, You will address them in 5 minutes. The academy requires the top performer to offer reflection. Wyatt frowned. And if I refuse, the professor's shoulders shifted with the subtle gesture that replaced a sigh. Then you waste the opportunity to teach what no machine ever could. Wyatt stood, stretched his shoulders once, and faced the glass screen as it flickered to life. On the other side, a massive auditorium slowly filled with rows of cadets from every represented species. Some had just returned from the challenge. Others had been eliminated much earlier. All of them were silent as the image of the human cadet came into focus on the screen. He cleared his throat. I'm not good with speeches. I'm not part of any elite stealth corps. I wasn't raised in zero-gravity simulators. I didn't even come from a city. I learned to be still in a forest where animals could smell your sweat and hear your heartbeat. He looked directly into the lens. You all had better gear. You all had better training. But you missed something. You didn't listen to the jungle. You tried to dominate it and it didn't care. Because real survival doesn't come from tech. It comes from patience, awareness, and humility. You don't beat nature by tricking it. You become part of it. The room remained silent. On one of the screens, the Valen cadet leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. Across the aisle, the Auric male rubbed his hands together in thought. The Syrian tapped a claw against her chin. No one laughed. No one scoffed. Wyatt exhaled once, then added, You want to vanish? Stop trying to be invisible. Start being unnoticed. The screen cut to black. Inside the debrief chamber, Zirak lowered his gaze. What you did will change our metrics. Your methods will be studied. I didn't do it for that. I know, the professor said. That's what makes it harder to ignore. He motioned toward the corridor. You are dismissed. Return to your dormitory. An official combination will be sent to your record. Wyatt turned to leave, but paused at the door. Professor, yes, I think some of your students would survive better without half the gadgets. Zyrtek didn't respond immediately. After a moment, he said, Perhaps, but our galaxy fears simplicity. It reminds us we were once prey. Wyatt nodded once, then walked out. The corridor was quiet as he made his way through the academy's upper levels. Holograms lit the walls, still showing statistics from the exercise. His name remained there, isolated at the top. No music played, no victory fanfare sounded, and yet it felt louder than any celebration he had ever heard. He reached the exit doors to the training block and stepped into the open. The artificial sky above the Academy's main campus simulated twilight, stars twinkling faintly across the dome. He stood there a moment, letting the cool air hit his skin. Back on Creon 7, the jungle had already reclaimed the place he had rested. The vines had closed. The mud had hardened again. The jungle had no memory of him, but the galaxy would never forget.